Hello everyone, my name is Iain MacLeod, Director of Imagine Australia and New Zealand. The purpose of this presentation is to give an introduction to me, the team, the services that we offer here at Imagine, a very high-level overview of life in Australia and New Zealand, and then I'm going to finish up with a more detailed look at the policies and processes that enable people to study, work, or to settle permanently in one of these two countries. I've been doing this work for over 36 years. We are located both in Auckland in New Zealand and Melbourne in Australia, and we employ a team of expert, licensed or registered immigration advisors or agents, and it's our role to make sure you get the visas that we believe you are entitled to. From the get-go, I've built a reputation, along with my crew, of not telling people what it is that they want to hear, but rather what it is that they need to know. Migration is a high stakes game. It comes with risks, it comes with rewards. And those of you looking at a permanent move to New Zealand or Australia need to understand very clearly that you will be chosen by the Australian or New Zealand governments. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day why you want to leave wherever it is you're watching this from. What's important is whether you've got what the governments require, be that family relationships, being in a relationship with a New Zealander or an Australian, having skills to bring the country that we need, and perhaps having a good idea about buying a business or establishing a business in one of these countries. So I'm going to spend the next 90 minutes or so telling you what I think you need to know, not what you want to hear. That's a really important starting off point. I'm not going to sweet talk you. I'm not here to talk you into migrating to New Zealand or Australia. I'm here to help those people that we genuinely believe have a credible plan, can afford to do it, have the skills and the temperament to deal with the slings and arrows that are going to be thrown at you during this process. Given how long this video is, not all of it might be relevant to your situation. So you'll see underneath it, we've got some time stamps. So you can basically fast forward, and that's important for those of you considering moving to New Zealand and not Australia, for example, or the other way around. You don't need to sit through the whole thing to get a lot of really good and valuable information. Now, having said that, many of you that want to come and live in New Zealand, we often use Australia as a very legitimate back door. And the reason for that is if you secure a permanent resident visa of Australia, which a great number of you are going to do without needing jobs or leaving home, that permanent resident visa does entitle you under New Zealand immigration law to a resident visa on arrival in New Zealand. So even though you might be focused on New Zealand and living here, it's important that you do pay some attention to the Australian immigration rules. Now, it does not work the other way. If you get a residency visa in New Zealand, you cannot by right go and live in Australia. So it's very much a one-way proposition, Australia as the back door to New Zealand. In terms of who we are and what we do, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that we are all licensed to give immigration advice. And that's really important in terms of protecting your interests and your future. Don't deal with unlicensed people in New Zealand or Australia. They are breaking the law in terms of giving you advice, and you've got to question the competence if they're trying to do it. So in terms of what we do for you, we really think of ourselves in two ways. One is we are legal project managers. It is our job to ensure you get the visas that we believe you are entitled to. And the second is support, advice, and information. So we do this in a number of ways. It begins with a free, no catches attached, preliminary assessment of the options we believe may be available to you. We have a form online, and you can see on the screen below now the URL that will take you to it if you haven't already done it. Now, I know a lot of you watching this have already done that preliminary evaluation, and we've encouraged you to watch the video. So that's the first thing. Are you in the game? And we'll give you some honest, free advice on that score. Then if you decide that you wish to proceed further, we're going to encourage you to have a private consultation with me or one of the senior team. And the idea of that consultation, which normally lasts at least 60 minutes, but often up to 2 hours, is for us to put meat on the bones of that initial feedback. So we go from high level, these are the options on the table, to far more detailed. This is how we're going to execute the strategy to get you and your family up the mountain that you are now standing at the base of. So it's legal project management and ensuring that immigration officers in Australia and New Zealand are provided with the information they need to say yes. And that's crucial when we hand over the documentation required for a visitor visa, a student visa, a resident visa, citizenship. We're not asking the opinion of an immigration officer. We are drawing on our many decades of work as experts in this field. We're explaining why that government official is going to give you the visa. And the second thing we do is provide an awful lot of support, advice, and information. We live in an information age, information overload actually. And there's not a whole lot I'm going to tell you in this presentation that is not available for free, thanks to Uncle Google or cousin ChatGPT. But ultimately, no government is going to give you 98% of a visa. They're going to demand of you 100% accuracy, or you simply fail. And it's as simple and as brutal as that. So moving from country to country, you can get a lot of information about opening bank accounts or insurances. Do you need them? Medical insurance. How do you enroll to get your kids in to see a GP? Savings, retirement plans, all that kind of stuff. We are New Zealanders. We are Aussies. Some of us are immigrants who've moved to New Zealand or Australia. We've climbed this mountain before you. In my case, I'm married. I've got 2 adult sons, now on to grandchildren. And there's an awful lot of experience rooted that we can share with you to help you before you get on the plane and after you get to New Zealand. The services that we offer are comprehensive, they are responsive, they are empathetic, but above all, it's going to be accurate. I often compare migration to climbing Mount Everest, and it's a picture I like to plant very clearly in my clients' minds. Lots of people think they can climb it, it's on their bucket list, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing to do? But the truth is, Mount Everest is big, it's bad, it's dangerous, it kills people. You've got to be organized, you've got to plan, you've got to be coached, you need to know where you're going to put your feet. So the immigration journey really is, in my mind, broken into 4 stages. And you're sitting at stage 1 right now, which is actually not on the mountain. You're standing over there somewhere. And it's an overview of policy and process. That's what you're getting today as part of this presentation. The second is the assessment, which I touched on a few minutes ago. Do the New Zealand or Australian governments actually want you? And consult with an expert, us preferably, and we're going to share with you strategy, timelines, costs, employability. How does all of this actually work? The third thing is to digest it. People who go charging up this mountain are the ones who don't see the crevasses or the cliffs, and they end up by tumbling off to their metaphorical death. And then the fourth is to make a decision. You're either up for it, you can afford it, you're willing to take the knocks along the way, or you are not. And that basically are the 4 steps to get the visas of New Zealand. So before I go a whole lot further, it's really important for me that you understand a few fundamental truths. And the first is that migrating is stressful. You're contemplating leaving friends, family, your jobs, everything you know and understand for a life that you hope is going to be better. Now, most of our clients here at Imagine tend to be married, mortgaged, middle class, 2 kids, urban professionals living in a city. Now, that doesn't mean we don't help single people or older people or childless people, but those are the majority of the people we represent. And so the stakes are very, very high. It's going to be emotionally difficult to make this move. We can help you with that, but we can't eliminate the stress that comes with it. Migration is not cheap. Poor people can't migrate, even though they're the ones who tend to want to migrate more than anybody else. But the fundamental truth is New Zealand and Australia are a long way away from where most of you are living and watching this from today. You can't swim and you can't build a boat. So you need to ensure you've got enough money to survive for the first few months after you get here. And of course, the not inexpensive visa application process itself. So this whole presentation is a reality check. And as I said earlier, I'm not here to tell you what I think you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what I think you need to know in this presentation, in a private consultation, in order that you can make a balanced decision. And this may come as a surprise to many people who live in Australia, but neither Australia nor New Zealand are actually perfect. And migration is a compromise. The best clients that I represent are actually those who have migrated before, and they understand what I'm talking about with these thought bubbles. So having said that, we can now move on to an overview of New Zealand and Australia, the economies, housing costs, cost of living, and so on. All those really important questions that you need. I would best describe New Zealand and Australia as socialist democracies with small c capitalism. We appreciate money is important because out of our taxes, we like to fund education, healthcare, and social security. So we believe in making money, but actually we don't have a fundamental problem with redistributing it to ensure those with less that we have, born with fewer advantages than perhaps I was arguably born with, have got equal opportunity to make the most of their 82 years or whatever they're going to get on the planet. Now, socialism in Australia and New Zealand is viewed almost as a badge of honour. Looking after your neighbours is a good thing. So I want to give you a bit of a very high-level overview of New Zealand and Australia in terms of GDP and cost of living, all those really important things that are quite hard to get a feel for if you haven't been to these places. Now, the first is GDP, gross domestic product. I must be honest, I can't stand this metric. The value of all goods and services produced in a country. It's supposed to grow every year. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Now, Australia's GDP is around 1.7 trillion US dollars. Now, Australia has a population of roughly 27 million people, and over and above that, there's roughly 1 million people floating around on various sorts of temporary visas. Here in New Zealand, we have a resident population of around 5.3 million people, and there's probably 200,000 people floating around on temporary visas. New Zealand's GDP is around about 250 billion US dollars. So Australia on a per capita basis is wealthier, probably by 20 to 30%. But this is the bit that I think is the most interesting. If we look at the World Prosperity Index, and this is a measure of non-material wealth, it's things like safety, security, governance, corruption, quality of our rivers, quality of our air, quality of the environment. New Zealand ranks 10th in the world. Australia comes in at 14th. And for those countries we like to compare ourselves to, the US, Canada, Singapore, other developed nations, you'll see that both New Zealand and Australia rank pretty well on the prosperity index. I do love the World Happiness Index. I mean, it's a bit sort of ooh-ah, I guess, but what this shows is that New Zealanders and Aussies are amongst the happiest people in the world. And those of you watching this out of places like Singapore and Hong Kong, where you are materially very well off, actually on the face of it, you're not all that happy. The Americans, 24th, the richest economy in the world, 24th happiest people. So I think that gives you some indication of what is important to us as New Zealanders and Australians. Family first, business second. We're not all slaves to the capitalist machine, and that does create some tension in terms of who funds all the free stuff, but it does, I think, emphasize that to us, money isn't the be-all and end-all. In terms of taxation, you're going to get it if you come to New Zealand or Australia. The Aussies are more highly taxed than the New Zealanders. On the other hand, Australian salaries tend to be higher than New Zealand. New Zealand has the third lowest tax rates in the OECD, and Australia comes in around about 11th. So I don't think too many of us can complain that when we compare ourselves to our peers in the developed world, that we are highly taxed. In fact, there's a real argument with a rapidly aging population in New Zealand and the same in Australia that our taxes actually should be higher so that we can continue to fund the free education, the free healthcare, and the social security that we expect, but it isn't happening. In terms of retirement, apparently New Zealand is the 8th best country in the world in which to retire, and Australia comes in, where does it come in? Ranks at 9th. So these are both pretty good places in which to retire if you believe the stats. Now, I spend several months every year living in Australia and the rest of my time in New Zealand, and you're sitting in my living room in our apartment in downtown Auckland. I have to be honest, I think that if I was forced to choose where I would want to retire, I think it's actually Australia. I do think that it has a more comprehensive public health system than what we are increasingly able to afford here in New Zealand. The weather can be better depending on where you go. Both countries actually ensure that we retire with a degree of dignity. But Australia has a compulsory retirement savings scheme, a means-tested pension, which most Australians are not eligible for anymore. So in Australia, employers pay contributions, 12% on top of salary, into compulsory retirement savings schemes, which can be realised from the age of 60, but most people retire at 67. In New Zealand, government funds our pensions. We don't have employer contributions. Actually, that's not quite true. We do, but nowhere near to the level of Australia. We don't means test, which means a billionaire gets the same pension as a pauper. So overall, what we're trying to achieve in these places is that people who are older do retire with some dignity. In terms of safety and security, New Zealand is ranked the 4th safest in the world in 2025, and Australia comes in at 22nd or 27th, depending on which survey you read. Now, again, as someone who spends a lot of time in Queensland, Australia, and in our office in Melbourne, I got to say, I don't feel any less safe in Australia as I do here in New Zealand. So one of those stats, to be honest, I'd take with a little bit of a pinch of salt. I'm always asked by my clients, how much does it cost to live in Australia? How much does it cost to live in New Zealand? Well, it's a little bit like asking me, or me asking you, how much does it cost to live in America or Canada or the UK or Singapore? And obviously everybody is going to be a little bit different. But if we focus on the married, mortgaged, middle class, 2 children living in the suburbs brigade, I think we can speak with a degree of confidence on what you would typically need to put food on the table, a roof over your head, pay your utilities, your insurances, make sure the kids have got school uniforms and so on. Across New Zealand, after tax, I believe that number fairly is around 6,000 New Zealand dollars, which would be something like $8,000 a month before tax. In Auckland, which is where I'm sitting, probably a good 20 to 25% higher, and that's primarily driven by the fact that property values and rents are higher here in Auckland than across the rest of New Zealand. I think the numbers are fairly similar for Australia in Australian dollar terms. And like New Zealand, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne are more expensive by a good 20 to 30% than most of the other secondary capitals like Perth, Adelaide, Darwin. And then once you get out of those big cities in Australia, cost of living is significantly lower. I would add so too salaries. So salaries do tend to fall when you move away from the major cities. Now the bulk of our clients are not average. You get into New Zealand or you get into Australia because you're more skilled, you're more highly educated than the average New Zealander or Australian. So you do tend to earn more. And a very typical Imagine Australia or New Zealand client profile in terms of household income would be $180,000 to $250,000 a year before tax. And that's going to mean for most people living in New Zealand or Australia, after you've paid your tax, you're probably talking about $12,000 to $15,000 in the hand. So what you can see from these first 2 metrics is that if you're both out there working, you're going to live a very comfortable upper middle socioeconomic existence. Far more difficult to survive in one of these countries on a single income. So if you are a single parent with 2 or 3 children, without a lot of support networks in place in Australia or New Zealand, things are going to be tight. Like the rest of the world, post-COVID, inflation was let out of the bottle. Central banks have pushed up interest rates to get the heat out of the economy. They've done that pretty well, actually, both here and Australia, such that in making this in September 2026, interest rates in New Zealand have fallen dramatically and they continue to fall. Australia is slower coming down because they were slower putting them up a couple of years ago. So in terms of interest rates, you're talking about 5 to 6% on a typical 20-25 year mortgage in New Zealand. And you're talking probably 1/4 to 1/2% higher in Australia. Now, generally, historically, interest rates are lower in Australia than here in New Zealand, but house prices can be a lot higher. So again, looking at the slide across New Zealand, the median house price today is about 770,000 New Zealand dollars. It'll be roughly 500,000 US dollars for those of you looking at this from the US. Auckland, it's around about 990,000 New Zealand, so just under 1 million. Australia, median 850,000. In terms of what you're going to get for that money, we're probably talking about a 200 square meter house. It'll be 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, kitchen, lounge, at least a single car garage, although increasingly in the bigger cities across Australia and New Zealand, we're building up. So not so much grass for the kids to play on. It can be apartment living, and apartments are generally significantly cheaper than a freestanding standalone house. In terms of economic growth, pretty anemic in both countries for the past couple of years. Both are projected to grow, citing that good old GDP number of perhaps 3% in New Zealand and about the same in Australia over the next 12 months or so. Unemployment in New Zealand has increased from around about 3.2% when we reopened the border following COVID in July 2022 to its current 5.2%. In Australia, it's increased from about 3% to 4.3%. So this is the central bank governors at work, squeezing the life out of all of us, and New Zealand has taken a bigger hit from that move than Australia, but by the same token, our interest rates are now falling pretty fast, and it is estimated by Christmas 2025, our interest rates, mortgages, probably going to be sitting around 4.5%. With that, of course, is going to come a recovery in house prices and a recovery in the economy. But certainly here in New Zealand right now, things are somewhat gloomy. The labour market is very tight in terms of getting work, slightly less so in Australia, but the strain is certainly starting to show over there as well. Those of you coming to New Zealand under one of the skilled migrant pathways must have an offer of skilled employment before you can secure work or residency visas. Some of you going to Australia will be in the same boat. Many of our clients, however, are able to secure residence of Australia without needing jobs first. Even if you can get residency without securing the job first, you're still, in all probability, unless you have a lot of money, are going to need to work. So how do you get jobs? And what are the key drivers that determine the speed with which that happens? The first is it's really important to send very strong signals that you are committed, you're serious, and you are available to employers. And that generally means be in New Zealand or be in Australia when you are looking for work. Now, roughly 85% of our clients at Imagine who need jobs to secure residency get their jobs while they are sitting in New Zealand or sitting in Australia. Maybe 15% secure work without being in country. So really important to send those signals of commitment. The second is English language fluency. Now, it might be obvious or it might not, but it doesn't matter how skilled you are, how motivated you are. If we don't understand a word you say, you're not going to get a job and your residency strategy will collapse. I often say to people, if you're having any trouble understanding my New Zealand accent, wait till you start talking to the Australians. You won't understand anything they say. And if they can't understand you and you can't understand them, you're not going to get a job. So English language fluency is critical. In some cases, I guess not so much. IT people, where you're talking to a computer all day, are a good example of where English may not be quite as important. But in customer-facing roles, leadership roles where you're dealing with English-speaking colleagues, dare I say it's pretty obvious, English language is going to be critical. And the third is cultural compatibility. And you know, in the days in which we live, where we crawl over eggshells, frightened we're going to offend people. Well, I'm not frightened. Cultural compatibility, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is getting a job is not just about being in country. It's not simply about understanding each other when we open our mouths. It's whether you are a good cultural fit for that business, for that school, for that hospital, for that organization. And if you have a tradition of sitting in the corner of the lunchroom, not talking to anybody and eating a dog with chopsticks, forgive me, but you're probably not going to be what I would call culturally compatible with the cultural norms of Australia or New Zealand. Now, does that make us xenophobic? Does that make us racist? I don't think so. I think you're going to find in every labour market all around the world, employers are going to want people who present as being most like them because they will fit in best. Now, I think it plays a much greater role than what most of you might imagine. New Zealand and Australia have very strong worker protection laws, Very difficult to fire people if, for whatever reason, you don't work out if you choose to join a company. You're offered a job. Rather than be honest with you and say, you are something of a risk to me if I offer you a job, you'll find recruiters, employers, hiring managers normally give you what I might politely call a bit of a BS throwaway line. Oh, you don't have a work visa, therefore I'm not going to interview you and I'm certainly not going to offer you a job. And I think the reason they give that answer or that explanation is simply because they don't want to take a risk. It's quite hard to get rid of you if they need to. So most of you looking for work are going to run into a catch-22. And those of you who have done that preliminary assessment, we will have pointed it out to you. And many of you will already, I'm sure, have been applying for jobs. And then you start scratching your head over the response, which is, you don't have a work visa, so I'm not going to consider you further for the role. Yet a little bit of research will reveal to you, you can't get a work visa without a job. So if I can't get the job without the work visa, but I can't get the work visa without the job, how do I get one? How do I get the job? Well, the answer is be in New Zealand, be in Australia, speak good English, be a good cultural fit, and be resilient, because you will be rejected over and over and over again. And you've got to be able to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and go and apply for more and more and more jobs. At the end of the day, hand on heart, around 98% of our clients who tick those three boxes, and the fourth being resilience, get skilled jobs that lead to the visas and the outcomes that they seek. But if you're one of those people who says, I'm not going to jump on a plane, I'm not going to take the risk of going to New Zealand or Australia to look for work, you could probably turn off the video now and go and watch Netflix, because chances of you joining us are actually probably pretty remote. So what's really important to understand about getting jobs is, sure, skills shortages play a part, but for the most part, my clients do not work, particularly in the case of New Zealand, on any skill shortage list, but they get jobs anyway. And this slide helps you understand why. Before I get into the visa policies and processes, I have 4 golden rules that I share with all my clients. And I swear if you went to the planet Zog and they've got bureaucrats, then these rules will apply just as much there as they do here. So bear these in mind. They'll help keep you sane while it will feel like the visa process is trying to break you. Suspend logic. Don't go looking for logic when it comes to immigration policies and processes. Immigration is political in New Zealand and Australia, far less so, thankfully, than in most other countries. But there just isn't a lot of logic to what is a politically driven process. The second is to assume nothing about your eligibility. You can go online and do all the research you want, but you're never going to know what you don't know. And there's an awful lot that you will simply never be able to find out about. And that right there accounts for the fact that probably 2 out of 3 people that have filed expressions of interest to come and live in New Zealand, for example, down the years, have never got to the top of this mountain that they want to climb because they've made assumptions about things. The third is, as soon as you think you understand the rules, they'll change. Or your visa will be assessed by an immigration officer who doesn't really know what they're doing. I could write a book about the inconsistent and incorrect decision-making of immigration bureaucrats. I mean, we exist because of these 3 golden rules. Here's number 4, treat with great caution what you read online. There's nothing I'm about to share with you about the visa pathways that is not available for free online. If you only get this 98% right, you're never going to stand on top of this mountain enjoying the view of New Zealand or Australia. This slide is meant to reinforce the fact that both New Zealand and Australia have temporary visas and they have permanent visas. Temporary, by their very nature, allow you to be in one of these countries for a specific reason, for a finite period of time. It could be to study as an international student. It could be to work for a year or 2 on a holiday working visa or an employer-specific work visa. Or it could be because you want to spend the rest of your life or a good chunk of it in New Zealand or Australia. And what's really important to understand, particularly in the New Zealand context, is that temporary visas don't really speak to permanent visas. And most of you are going to need multiple visas or types of visas to eventually stand on the top of the mountain having secured your residency. And just to illustrate the point, this next slide gives you an indication of all the different visa types that you can get. It's really interesting. I think at last count, Australia has 27 different pathways to residency visas. It has something like 72 temporary visa types. New Zealand is actually not a long way behind. So if you can work out from the slide what visas you need, then maybe you don't need me quite so much as I think you probably do. And this isn't even all of them, by the way. If I put up every type of visa that is available in both countries, there would actually be a sea of white on the screen. There wouldn't actually be any blue.